first think that it's important to have a common ground.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching a World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Hong Kong police arrests 13 people in connection with last week's deadly fire that killed at least 151 in a residential complex. Early investigations revealed that substandard building materials contributed to the fire. Death toll from floods and landslides in Indonesia rises to 502. Meanwhile, 508 individuals still missing. Tulip Siddique, the British Labour MP for Hampstead and Highgate, has been sentenced to 2 years in prison by a Bangladeshi court over corruption charges related to her aunt, the country's ousted former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Amid the ongoing peace talks on ending the Russia-Ukraine war, US President Donald Trump expresses hope, says good chance of reaching a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. As Ukrainian delegation wrapped up Ukraine peace talks in the United States, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that talks were productive, but more work is to be done on the truce proposal. At least 3 people have been killed and 8 others have been wounded in a strike by Russia on the east-central Ukrainian city of Dnipro. The governor has said that emergency crews are working to put out fires and search the rubble for anyone who may still be trapped. US President Donald Trump confirms reports of telephonic conversation with Venezuelan leader Maduro. However, Trump did not reveal further details. This call comes amid escalating tension between both the countries. Venezuelan leader accuses US of wanting to take over its oil resources. Venezuela has also asked OPEC Plus to show solidarity in the face of what it considers an escalation that could endanger Venezuela oil production. And viewers, we have some fresh breaking news inputs coming in at top of the bulletin. French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have held talks with several European leaders. They have also spoken with the US envoy Steve Witkoff and Ukrainian Chief Secretary Rustem Umerov, focusing on diplomatic coordination and security matters amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The meetings underscore France and Ukraine's efforts to align strategies with European partners and strengthen multilateral engagement. We'll shortly be joined in by David K. Johnston, who's an American author from New York. He will be joining us to give more opinion on the latest round of discussions that are now being held between Zelensky and Macron at the Elysee Palace. Zelensky, of course, met with Macron as a US-led peace proposal is underway. Now, Zelensky has met Macron at the Elysee Presidential Palace as part of a flurry of diplomatic activity that ultimately seek to arrive at a potential ceasefire in the 4-year-long running war in Ukraine. In fact, Zelensky's visit to Paris is also followed by a meeting between a Ukrainian and US officials in Florida on Sunday, and tomorrow Steve Witkoff will be headed to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. And now, the two sides have worked to make revisions to the US-authored plan that was developed in negotiations between Washington and Moscow, but it was condemned for being rather tilted towards Moscow's interests. The accusations that came from the European Union. Now, ahead of his meeting with Zelensky today, Macron's office had said that the two leaders would discuss conditions for a fair and lasting peace. Macron's office later also said he and Zelensky had held talks with European partners, including leaders from Britain, Germany, Poland, Italy, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Now, also included in the talks were European Union officials, Antonio Costa and Ursula von der Leyen, and NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte. Macron and Zelensky also held phone calls with US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Those statements coming in from Emmanuel Macron's office. Zelensky turns to Europe after talks with US officials. And moving on, viewers, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has warned that talks between Russian President Putin and US envoy Steve Witkoff could pressure Ukraine into making concessions. Let's listen into her comments.
All the pressure will be put on the weaker side, because that is the easier way to stop this war when Ukraine surrenders. But this is not in anybody's interest, not in the interest of Ukraine, not in the interest of European Union, also not in the interest of the global overall security.
And speaking in Brussels, Kallas emphasized that Russia doesn't want peace and the European Union must strengthen Ukraine to stand firm. Her comments followed a proposal to limit Russia's military budget in response to a US-backed peace plan that restricts Ukraine's armed forces. This is what she said further.
I'm afraid that all the pressure will be put on the victim, which is that Ukraine has to make concessions and obligations. Whereas, in order to have peace, we shouldn't lose focus that it's actually Russia who has started this war, and Russia that is continuing this war, and Russia that is really targeting civilian infrastructure every single day to cause as much damage as possible.
Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Grushko rejected this, saying no power could curb Russia's military budget. Kallas also mentioned a productive meeting between US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Ukrainian officials, though the results are unclear. The European Union Council is expected to discuss military aid to Ukraine in the upcoming talks. In fact, European Union Foreign Policy Chief has signaled that pivotal moment is ahead as the bloc moves to reinforce Ukraine's defense. European Union viewers faces a pivotal week on Ukraine as ministers now focus on strengthening aid and assessing progress in challenging US diplomatic talks. Stern statements coming from Kaja Kallas. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has said that the coming days could be a pivotal moment for diplomatic efforts to end the war. She said the difficult but productive talks were held on the potential peace agreement. Kallas has also emphasized the urgency of reinforcing Ukraine's defenses, stressing that Moscow has showed no signs of seeking peace. In fact, in a statement, she said, and I quote, "It is clear that Russia does not want peace, and therefore we need to make Ukraine as strong as possible in order for them to be ready to stand up for themselves in this very, very difficult time." Calling the week ahead potentially decisive, Kallas has also pointed to the ongoing discussions in Washington. She said that both Ukraine's defense and foreign ministers would brief European Union officials on the meeting. Now, talks between US and Ukraine on Sunday in Florida centered on determining where a potential peace agreement would establish the de facto border with Russia, according to two Ukrainian officials. Now, speaking after the meeting, in fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said that the session was productive and successful as negotiations continue on the peace plan. Kallas has stressed that Ukraine ultimately carries the burden of its own defense. She said Ukrainians are there alone. If they would be together with Europeans, they would definitely be much stronger. But I trust that the Ukrainians stand up for themselves. Statement coming from Kaja Kallas. on the Belgium hesitation. She said that using profits from frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine has legitimate concerns. And now joining us into the conversation here is Matthew Wadham, author and journalist from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us here at NewsX World and taking time out to speak with us. I want to ask my first question to you. What do you think is in stake for the European Union in the peace talks? Is it possible for a peace deal to be struck without Europe's demands being really met?
Their argument is
without my demands being met? You mean without the U.S. demands being met?
European Union's demands.
providing the
Right now, I think the big sticking point appears to be, and we're very limited in terms of the information we have, because we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. But the big sticking point with Ukraine is they don't want to have to give up territory that Russia has conquered through military conquest. And the two sides are putting on a happy face right now and saying that they're making a lot of progress. But, that could just be diplomatic smoke screen, happy faces all around. And I think the sticking point is they don't want to give up. Ukraine is opposed to land for peace. Now, what would make them agree to give up some of their land is not clear. I think they're pretty dead set against doing so. And I'm not sure what it would take from the United States or from Russia for Ukraine to agree to that, because that is a pretty fundamental point. They want to safeguard their sovereignty over their own land.
it's true that Congress hasn't provided statute.
All right, Matthew, could you also help me understand here the European Union that's primarily wanting to use the Russian frozen assets? Will Russia really allow for that?
I cannot imagine Russia would agree to give up its frozen assets unless it was a small enough amount that that Russia wouldn't miss the money. If it's a very large sum, I do not see them agreeing to it. If it's something minor, maybe they would agree to it, but they don't regard the they don't think that it was legitimate of the United States to launch all sorts of sanctions against Russia, and they don't think that they should have to give up their property in order to buy peace. But perhaps this is a point on which they're flexible. I imagine they're going to be more flexible on money than Ukraine is going to be on giving up its territory to Russia.
Thank you, Matthew, for joining us and speaking to us. Meanwhile, viewers, those are live visuals on your screens as Zelensky and Putin hold all important talks. Zelensky, in fact, says that Russia should get no reward for its war in Ukraine. And Macron has made claims to say that we will have better clarity on Russia's desire to move forward after US-Russia talks. Coming days will see further discussions between US and Ukraine's allies on security guarantees. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron addressing the media now. On your screens are those visuals. Zelensky has reiterated that Russia should receive no reward for its aggression in Ukraine. In a recent statement, Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine's primary focus remains on securing guarantees for its security and maintaining its sovereignty amidst ongoing tension with Russia. Very crucial and most recent statements from Zelensky as US envoy Steve Witkoff will meet with Putin tomorrow in Moscow. The meet between Zelensky and Macron also coming after Ukrainian officials met with US officials in Florida on Sunday. Now, Macron also commented on the situation, stating that the coming days will see further discussions between the US and Ukraine's allies regarding security guarantees. French president stressed that European nations and Ukraine's allies must be present at the negotiating table to ensure the protection of Ukraine's territorial integrity. He also noted that Ukraine and only Ukraine has the right to decide on its territorial matters. And now moving on, viewers, the United States and the United Kingdom have reached a major deal to eliminate tariffs on UK-made pharmaceutical products and medical technology. As part of the agreement, the UK will increase the net price it pays for new medicines by 25%. This deal also includes a significant shift in the way the United Kingdom's National Health Service evaluates the cost effectiveness of the new drugs. In return, UK origin pharmaceuticals, drug ingredients and medical technologies will be exempt from Section 32 tariffs. The agreement also involves adjustments to the UK's NICE framework for evaluating the cost effectiveness of new medicines with a focus on quality adjusted life years. And Raymond Vickery, who's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Mr. Vickery, for joining us. Appreciate you giving us your time here at NewsX World. Mr. Vickery, what do you think is the significance of this deal, and what's the UK to gain now, given pharmaceuticals are one of its biggest exports to the US?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems to me the major takeaway from this latest development in regard to the UK and pharmaceuticals is that the Trump administration's tariff policy is really in complete disarray. You know, back in April, there were the so-called liberation tariffs, which are supposed to be reciprocal. A number of tariffs were announced. Then a number of so-called agreements were announced. But those agreements really didn't get down into the granular level necessary to deal with the problems such as imports of pharmaceuticals from the UK. This later deal departs from the multilateral approach, which has served us so well since World War II, and seems to be, again, the Trump administration predilection for bilateral deals. There is a zero tariff after threatening 100% tariff. There are some so-called commitments to make further investments in the United States, and ironically to raise the price charged to public health in the UK. So it's very difficult to tell how this landed, and of course it has implications for India and other countries across the board. As to what exactly will be the Trump approach on tariffs for pharmaceuticals. And of course, this is a very, very crucial area to build peace and prosperity throughout the world. So one can only hope that these matters will be worked through, but that is not happening at a rate necessary to get back to where we were before President Trump created this chaos.
All right. To stay on with us, Mr. Vickery, as we move on to some more developments that are coming in, and this one from Honduras that's holding its election. Now, a conservative candidate who is backed by US President Donald Trump is narrowly leading a right-wing rival in the presidential election, as per the partial results from the Electoral Commission. According to the National Electoral Council, Nasri Asfura had 40% of the votes and led Salvador Nasrallah by just 0.2 percentage points, with 56% of votes counted. Both candidates were more than 20 percentage points ahead of Rishi Moncada of the ruling leftist party, who was trailing heavily, signaling another Latin American nation poised to swing towards rightward. However, the campaign was dominated by Trump's threat to cut aid if his favorite candidate, Asfoura, would lose. The vote count from yesterday's election has progressed slowly, but the final results could take days. And I would request Mr. Vickery to join us back into the discussion here. Mr. Vickery, what's your reaction to the development? Of course, counting of votes is still underway. Only a certain number of votes has been counted as yet. But the elections, how fair were they really, given that Trump had already issued threats of cutting aid if his favorite candidate was not elected?
Well, thanks very much for letting me comment on this. You know, this is really a part of President Trump's view that he can revert to some sort of 19th century approach to Latin America, that's in the United States backyard, and therefore he can influence, control elections by interfering in the elections of a sovereign nation like Honduras. The matter with Asfoura is particularly troublesome because he has, at the same time he endorsed Asfoura, he pardoned the former colleague of Asfoura, who had been convicted and sentenced to 45 years in a U.S. prison for drug trafficking. And President Trump claims that what he's doing in regard to Venezuela, Colombia, blowing boats out of the water is to be in aid of stopping drug trafficking. And yet in regard to Honduras, he thinks he's made a deal with Asfoura to bend to his wishes, and at the same time letting this drug trafficker out of prison. The race is very close. There is another conservative candidate who is virtually tied with President Trump's chosen candidate. And at last count, only about 60% of the vote was in, and there was a large part of the vote not counted was in an area which may not be favorable to Asfoura. So whether this is going to work for President Trump or not is not known. But here again, you know, to wage peace and prosperity, you have to have a strategy, you have to have partners. You can't do it just like a real estate transaction. I might add that Mr. Asfoura is a real estate developer, and so President Trump feels very comfortable with this kind of bilateral transaction. But it's no way to run a United States foreign policy. As I say, it's a reversion back into the time when there was a quasi-imperialistic approach by the United States to Latin America, which we had abandoned some time ago.
All right, thank you for your comment there, Mr. Vickery. I request you to stay on further with us. Viewers, there's some groundbreaking news now coming in regard to HIV prevention. South Africa, Eswatini and Zambia have begun rolling out a new twice-a-year injection called lenacapavir, the first public deployment of the breakthrough drug on the continent. The shot cuts HIV transmission risk by more than 99.9%, making it functionally similar to a powerful vaccine. South Africa's first doses were administered through a Wits University program funded by Uodatew. Zambia and Eswatini have launched theirs during World AIDS Day events after receiving 1,000 doses each from a US initiative. The drug currently costs $28,000 a year in the US, but Gilead has agreed to supply 2 million doses at no profit across high-burden countries. Generic versions are expected by 2027, priced around $40 per year. request Mr. Vikri to join us back into the discussion here. Mr. Vikri, would you agree there's fresh hope now in HIV prevention in Africa?
Well, I think that this is a very positive development. Having a vaccine, really, which can prevent HIV, is a startling and very significant development. Unfortunately, the United States, after the leadership of President George W. Bush on fighting AIDS in Africa, has stepped back. It has abolished its USAID program. And so others are trying to step in to fill this void. The Gates Foundation is to collaborate with Indian generic pharmaceutical companies to try to manufacture this vaccine in a cost-effective manner. Unfortunately, that's not going to be available at earliest to 2027. And in the meantime, you see various private entities, Gilead, a pharmaceutical company, and others trying to fill the gap. Here again, to create peace and prosperity in the world, you need a strategy and you need partners. The late Secretary of State Albright called the United States the indispensable country, and it may not be indispensable, but its leadership certainly is necessary at this point, and unfortunately it is lacking. Thank goodness others like India are stepping up to try to fill this vacuum, particularly in the global south. And as one is to hope that private partnerships such as the Gates Foundation with Indian companies will be able to fill this void. But it is a very close question whether this life-saving development will be widespread enough to be able to make the kind of change which is necessary for the health of the African continent.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vikri, for continuing to stay with us in this discussion. And viewers, with that, we shift our focus to news from Saudi Arabia, which appears to have relaxed its alcohol rules again, just days after non-diplomatic residents were first allowed to buy booze in the kingdom. Now, foreign residents in Riyadh say that non-Muslim expats earning at least 50,000 riyals a month, which is about $13,300, are now being allowed to purchase alcohol at the country's only licensed store. Until late last month, only diplomats and premium visa holders could shop there, but residents say staff now verify their residency and salary through a government platform before completing the sales. Purchases have surged, with thousands of premium visa holders already buying alcohol since the initial easing. There are also reports that additional alcohol shops could open in Jeddah and the Bahrain in 2026, though there's been no official confirmation on that yet. The quiet loosening marks another step in the kingdom's drive to attract foreign talent and investment while navigating the sensitivities of a country where alcohol has been banned since 1952. And that's all the time that we have for. Thank you for staying tuned to NewsX World for all the latest news and updates from around the world.